7 years passed, and the Arab executive saw the boy beside his ex and cried with emotion. 7 years ago, Hassan al-Fahim lost the love of his life, Emily, to the cruel grip of poverty. Now, a millionaire executive with a glamorous wife, his past feels like a distant memory, until one fateful day. Stopped at a traffic light, he sees a boy begging for money. Something about the boy stops him cold, and then he sees her, Emily, the woman he never stopped loving, standing in the shadows. Why is she here? Who is the boy? And what happens when a long-buried truth is revealed? Stay to the end. You won't believe what unfolds. Hassan al-Fahim sat in the back of his luxurious limousine, his fingers drumming against the soft leather seat as the world outside passed by in a blur. He had everything now: wealth, power, a beautiful wife, and the admiration of millions. But there was always something missing, something he couldn't escape. Emily. He often tried to forget her, pushing memories of their difficult years together into the recesses of his mind. But those memories haunted him. He remembered the days when they barely had enough to eat, when they shared dreams and laughter in a cramped apartment, and the way she had looked at him with so much hope in her eyes, hope that he couldn't provide for her, that he couldn't give her the life she deserved. Then, one rainy night, she left. No words, no explanation. She just vanished from his life as if she never existed. He spent years searching for her, but Emily was a ghost. Every trace led to nothing, and he eventually gave up. Now, with the wealth and status he had worked so hard for, he felt empty. He had everything, but there was a constant ache in his chest, an ache for the woman who had walked out of his life and the family he never got to have with her. He had married Layla, a stunning socialite, but their marriage felt hollow. There was no passion, no warmth, just appearances. As the limousine sped through the streets of the city, Hassan's thoughts wandered back to Emily. Where was she now? What had become of her? Was she living in luxury? Or was she still struggling? Lost in his reverie, Hassan barely noticed the car slowing down at the busy intersection. The light had turned red, and the limo came to a halt. His eyes, half-lidded from the weight of his thoughts, shifted toward the sidewalk. And then he saw him. A young boy, no more than 7 years old, standing on the corner, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps, please." The boy's clothes were worn, his face tired, eyes filled with sadness. Hassan felt a tug in his chest. Something about the boy's face, the hopelessness in his expression, it was too familiar. He felt the need to do something, to help. He reached for his wallet, rolled down the window, and handed the boy some money. But as the boy took the money, Hassan's eyes moved past him to the woman standing in the shadows behind him. It was Emily. She stood there, looking older, but unmistakably her. Her clothes were ragged, her face thin, and her eyes hollow with years of struggle. Her gaze met his for a brief second, and everything in that moment came crashing down. The world around them faded. Hassan's heart skipped a beat as his mind raced to understand what he was seeing. Emily. She was standing there, begging for money, just like the boy. He could hardly believe it. He watched her for a moment, struggling to process the sight of the woman he once loved, now living in such desperation. The limo driver, unaware of what was happening, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, waiting for the light to change. But Hassan was frozen. His eyes were locked on Emily. He couldn't move. He didn't know whether to call out to her, to run to her, or to turn away and pretend this moment didn't exist. But then something caught his eye. The boy. The same boy who had been standing at the corner with the cardboard sign. He looked up at Hassan, his eyes wide with curiosity, and in that brief moment, Hassan saw something that made his blood run cold. The boy looked just like him. He couldn't breathe. The boy, standing beside Emily, wasn't just any child. It was his child. The son he had never known. The world seemed to stop. Hassan's mind raced as emotions flooded him. Shock, disbelief, confusion, and guilt. How could he not have known? How could he not have realized? The light turned green, but Hassan didn't move. He stared at Emily and the boy, feeling like the ground beneath him was slipping away. Hassan sat frozen in the back of the limousine, his hand still gripping the door handle as if it could anchor him to reality. His heart hammered in his chest. The boy was his. He had seen it in the eyes of the child. Those eyes were his own, filled with the same darkness, the same strength, the same pain. But how? How had this happened? How had Emily, his Emily, the woman who had walked out of his life, ended up in this dire situation? How had the child grown without him ever knowing? He'd searched for years, convinced that he could never find her, yet here she was, living in the shadows of his world, a world that had become so disconnected from the one they had once shared. The limousine pulled into the nearest parking lot, but Hassan barely noticed. His thoughts were swirling, each question spiraling into another. Emily had left him all those years ago, disappearing without a trace, and now she was standing there, with his son. It didn't make sense. He opened the door and stepped out of the car, the crisp air hitting his face. The sound of the bustling city faded away as he walked toward the street corner. Emily saw him approach. Her face was like a mask of disbelief, her lips trembling. She didn't speak. She couldn't. The world had once been hers, and now it was slipping away. She had been so close to surviving, to finding her place in a world that had been so unforgiving. But now, standing before the man she once loved, she felt small, ashamed. Emily. Hassan's voice broke through the silence. The moment her name left his lips, 1,000 emotions rushed through him. Longing, regret, love. She turned her head slightly, the faintest hint of recognition in her eyes. It was there, but she couldn't bring herself to say anything. She had been carrying the weight of this secret for so long, and now, standing in front of him, it felt unbearable. "Why?" Hassan whispered, his eyes searching her face. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come back?" Emily shook her head. The years of struggle, of hunger, of pain, all of it had built up inside her. She didn't have the words to explain. She couldn't tell him that she had left because she couldn't bear to watch him suffer any longer. She couldn't tell him that she had made the hardest decision of her life when she walked away, hoping that one day he would be strong enough to survive without her. She didn't have the strength to tell him that she had never stopped loving him. She paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't want to be a burden anymore, Hassan. You were struggling. We were both struggling." Her voice cracked and she wiped away a tear. "I didn't want to drag you down." The words cut through Hassan like a knife. He had never understood why she left, but hearing it now, he was torn. He had thought she had just abandoned him, but she had left to save him, to give him a chance at a better life, a life free from the struggles they had endured together. "And the boy?" Hassan's voice was barely a whisper, but it held the weight of 1,000 questions. Emily hesitated. "He's yours, Hassan. He's our son." She closed her eyes as if the words alone were enough to crush her. Hassan felt his world shatter. His son, he had a son. All these years he had thought that part of him had been lost forever, but here in front of him stood the living proof that he wasn't the man he thought he was. He wasn't the man who had lost everything. He was the man who had lost time. The boy, his boy, stood silently behind Emily, his small face still full of innocence, despite the world that had already shown him its harshness. Hassan could see it now, the way the boy carried himself, the way his eyes shifted from him to Emily. The bond was there, undeniable. A million emotions flooded Hassan. He wanted to take the boy in his arms, to say he was sorry, to make everything right, but he didn't know where to begin. He didn't know how to make amends for the years he had wasted, for the family he had never had the chance to build. "Emily, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have never let you go. I should have found you." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and love. "You couldn't, Hassan. You didn't know." Her voice was soft, but it carried years of sorrow. The world around them seemed to disappear. The city sounds, the passing cars, the distant hum of life, none of it mattered. In that moment, it was just Hassan, Emily, and the child they had created together, standing at the crossroads of the life they might have had. "Please," Hassan said, his voice urgent. "Come with me. Let me help you. Let me make up for everything." Emily shook her head, her face twisted in conflicting emotions. "It's too late for that. We're already too far gone." But Hassan couldn't give up. He couldn't walk away again. Not now, not when he finally had the chance to fix everything. He reached out to her, his hand trembling, and placed it gently on her shoulder. "I'm not giving up on you, Emily. On us. Let me prove it." Hassan stood there, hand on Emily's shoulder, his heart racing. It was as if the past 7 years had collapsed into that single moment, and everything he had fought for, his wealth, his success, his marriage, seemed meaningless compared to what he had just discovered. His son, his flesh and blood, was standing right in front of him, and yet it felt like he was in the middle of a nightmare. He had missed his son's entire life, and for what? For a future he thought was built on stability, but now seemed empty. Emily pulled back from him, her face pale, eyes avoiding his. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I've been living without you for so long, Hassan. You can't just walk back into my life like nothing happened." Hassan's chest tightened as he tried to take in her words. He could see the bitterness, the pain in her eyes, and he knew that even though they were standing together in this moment, the gulf between them was immense. "I know I can't just fix everything with a word, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. We can start over. We can make up for the time we lost." Emily shook her head, her eyes flashing with anger and sorrow. "It's not that simple. You can't erase 7 years of silence, 7 years of me doing everything alone. I didn't even know where you were, if you were alive or dead. I couldn't wait forever, Hassan. You disappeared from my life and I had to survive." Hassan felt the sting of her words, each one cutting deeper than the last. He had always wondered why she left without a trace, why she had disappeared into the night without a word. But hearing her speak of it now, he understood. She had done what she thought was best. She had walked away because she couldn't stand to watch him struggle anymore, to see him broken in the same way she felt. "I should have found you. I should have never let you go," he muttered, his voice breaking. Emily's eyes softened for a moment, but then she turned toward the boy, her son, who stood silently at her side, clutching her hand. Hassan followed her gaze and saw the boy, who was watching them with wide eyes. He looked so much like Hassan, it took his breath away. The same strong jawline, the same dark hair, the same curious look in his eyes. "His name is Omar," Emily said softly, her voice barely audible. "He's 7 now, and he's been asking about you." "About his father." She paused, her lips trembling. "I never wanted to lie to him, but I didn't know what to say. I couldn't just tell him you had abandoned us." Omar's eyes flickered to Hassan, then back to his mother. There was something so innocent, so trusting about the boy's gaze, but there was also a hint of doubt, of confusion. He didn't understand why he was suddenly meeting this man, the man who, according to his mother, had been part of his past but was now a stranger. Hassan dropped to one knee in front of Omar, his heart in his throat. "Omar, I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm your father, and I haven't been there for you, but I'm here now. I'm going to make it right." Omar stared at him, unsure of what to say. Hassan felt the boy's hesitation, his unease, and he knew it was only natural. He had never been there for Omar. He had never seen him take his first steps, hear his first words, or experience the joys and pains of fatherhood. And now, standing in front of him, he couldn't even hold his son's gaze for long without feeling like a complete failure. Emily watched silently, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her face expressionless. She was torn. Part of her wanted to forgive Hassan, to give him the chance he was asking for, but the other part of her, the part that had suffered so much alone, was still angry, still hurt. She had fought so hard to make a life for herself and Omar, and now Hassan wanted to walk in and pretend everything was okay. "I've done the best I could for him, Hassan," Emily said, her voice cold, "and I won't let you come in and ruin everything now. We've survived without you. I won't go back to a life of uncertainty just because you decided to remember us." Hassan looked up at her, pain written all over his face. "I don't want to ruin anything, Emily. I want to help you. I want to be part of Omar's life." There was a long silence, broken only by the faint sound of traffic in the distance. Hassan watched Emily's face, waiting for any sign of what she was thinking, but she remained still, unreadable. Finally, she sighed and turned to Omar. "We can't go back to the way things were, Hassan," she said, her voice softer now, but still firm. "But for him, maybe we can try. For Omar's sake, we'll figure something out." Hassan felt a wave of relief wash over him, though it was mixed with an overwhelming sense of guilt. He had a chance to be in his son's life, to make up for lost time, but it wasn't going to be easy. He had a lot to prove, to Emily, to Omar, and to himself. He stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving Emily. "I won't let you down again. I promise." Emily nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "We'll see." As they walked away from the corner, Hassan kept his gaze fixed on his son, trying to absorb the reality of the situation. The child he had never known. The son who was now a part of his life in a way he couldn't have imagined. And yet, as the distance between them grew, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had a long road ahead, one filled with struggles, regrets, and moments of redemption. But one thing was certain. Hassan was no longer the man he once was. He had lost so much, but now he was determined to rebuild everything. The days that followed were an emotional blur for Hassan. He had always prided himself on his ability to keep control of his life, his work, and his emotions. Yet, in the face of the child who was his son and the woman who once meant everything to him, he felt like a man adrift in a storm, struggling to keep his footing. He had always believed that wealth and success were the pillars of happiness, but now, standing on the precipice of a future that seemed uncertain and fragile, he realized how wrong he had been. The first few days after their encounter had been difficult. Emily had been distant, cautious, and Hassan understood. She was not the same woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. She had changed. She had survived. She had spent years building a life for herself and Omar, and while Hassan's sudden reappearance might have opened a door, it didn't mean she was ready to walk through it. Hassan had tried to contact her multiple times, but Emily was slow to respond. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet. She had every right to be angry, every right to question his intentions. They had a past that couldn't be erased with a few heartfelt promises. The pain she had endured could not simply be undone. The next time he saw Emily, it wasn't in the dimly lit street corner where they first reunited, but in the more formal setting of a coffee shop. She agreed to meet with him after days of hesitating, and Hassan had arrived early, nervously shifting in his seat as he waited. He had no idea what to expect. Was she going to tell him to leave them alone forever? Or would she give him a chance to explain, to show her that he was different, that he had changed? When she finally walked through the door, he saw the familiar trace of sadness in her eyes. But there was something else too, something softer, something that told him she was considering what he had said. She wasn't angry anymore, just weary. Hassan stood up as soon as he saw her, his pulse quickening. He hadn't seen her in years, but she still had the same effect on him. "Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Hello, Hassan," she replied, her tone cool, but not unkind. She sat down opposite him, her hands folded on the table. "I'm glad you came," Hassan said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know this is hard, but I need you to know how sorry I am for everything. I can't change the past, but I can change the future." Emily didn't answer immediately. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. She could see the man who had once been filled with ambition, with dreams of wealth and power. But now, as he sat before her, he was a man broken by time, regret, and lost opportunities. She couldn't deny that a part of her still cared for him, but that part was buried under years of hurt, years of sacrifice for a child she had raised alone. "You think it's that simple?" Emily asked finally, her voice low. "You think you can just walk back into our lives and make everything right with a few words? You didn't know, Hassan. You didn't know what I went through, what Omar went through." Hassan's eyes softened. "I know, and I can never fully understand, but I want to. I want to help you. I want to make up for the years I wasn't there, for him and for you." Emily's breath hitched, but she didn't look away. "You can't just fix everything. I've worked so hard to build a life for Omar, and we're okay now. We don't need you to come in and sweep us off our feet with your wealth and promises." "I don't care about the money," Hassan said, his voice urgent. "I never cared about that. I've been chasing something that didn't matter. What matters now is you, Emily. It's Omar. I don't need anything else." The words hung between them like a fragile thread. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to show any weakness. "I didn't want to need you, Hassan. I didn't want to depend on you again. But I still loved you. I still do. And that's the hardest part of all." Hassan's heart clenched at the admission, but before he could respond, the door to the cafe opened, and in walked a familiar face, Omar. The boy, now 7 years old, walked straight to their table, his small hand holding the corner of a crumpled dollar bill. His eyes flickered between Hassan and Emily, still unsure of what was going on. He had seen his mother cry for years, but now his father was sitting there, so close, yet so distant. "Hi, Dad," Omar said softly, his voice hesitant. The word hit Hassan like a ton of bricks. Dad. His son had called him that. Not knowing what to do, Hassan stood up and kneeled down in front of him. "Omar, I didn't know. I didn't know I had a son. I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. Omar looked at him with wide eyes, unsure how to react. His face was a mixture of confusion and curiosity. He had always wondered about his father, but now that he was here, it felt unreal. "Are you going to stay?" Omar asked quietly, his small voice tinged with uncertainty. "Are you going to help us now?" Hassan didn't know how to answer. What could he say? That he would make everything better? That he could erase the years of pain and loneliness? "I want to be there for you, Omar. I want to help. But I need your mom's permission. I can't do this alone," he said, his gaze shifting to Emily, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of hope and fear. Emily's expression softened as she looked at the boy she had raised alone for so long. This was the moment where the past collided with the present, and everything she had fought for would either crumble or begin anew. She took a deep breath. "Let's take this one step at a time, Hassan. We're not rushing into anything. But if you're serious, then show us. Prove to me and to Omar that you're not the same man who walked away all those years ago." Hassan nodded, a sense of determination flooding through him. This was his chance. This was his moment to make things right. He wasn't going to fail again. He couldn't. For Omar, for Emily, he had to fight for them. The days that followed were filled with quiet, tentative steps toward rebuilding a life that Hassan had almost given up on. There was an unspoken understanding between him and Emily, a fragile truce, but the road to redemption wasn't as simple as just showing up and making promises. Every time Hassan tried to get closer to Omar, to be the father he had never been, there was a cold distance between them, a wall that had been built over the years of abandonment and silence. It was as if Omar didn't know how to trust him, and Hassan couldn't blame him. Emily, too, was cautious. She had lived without Hassan for so long, and while a part of her still yearned for the love they had shared, the pain of betrayal was a heavy weight to carry. She had to constantly remind herself that she was not the same woman who had fallen in love with him in the past. That woman had been naive, hopeful, someone who had believed in the idea of a perfect life. The woman she was now had fought to survive, to raise Omar on her own. She was stronger, more guarded, and she couldn't let herself fall back into the same illusions. But Hassan didn't give up. He spent every possible moment with Omar, even when the boy seemed disinterested or hesitant. Hassan knew it would take time. He couldn't expect to just walk in and take the place of a father who had always been there for him. But he was determined, and that determination began to show in small ways. He was patient with Omar, teaching him how to ride a bike, taking him to the park, doing everything he could to build a bond with his son. One afternoon, Hassan took Omar to the zoo. It was a simple outing, nothing extravagant, but it felt monumental to Hassan. They wandered through the exhibits, talking about the animals, laughing at the playful monkeys, and, slowly, Omar began to warm up to him. For the first time in years, Hassan allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to be a family again. When they returned to the car, Omar asked, "Are we going to see Mom now?" Hassan's heart ached. The question was innocent enough, but it carried so much weight. "I think she's waiting for us at home," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. At that moment, Hassan realized how much he had missed. He had missed the small, quiet moments, moments that didn't have to be grand or perfect, but moments that shaped a family. And all these years, while he had been focused on building his career and securing his future, he had ignored the most important thing in the world, the people who mattered most. Back at home, Emily was waiting for them. She was sitting on the couch, her eyes tired but softened by the sight of Omar running to her, his arms outstretched. "Mom, guess what?" Omar said excitedly. "Dad took me to the zoo. We saw monkeys and lions and tigers." Emily smiled, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She was glad that Omar was enjoying his time with Hassan, but a part of her still couldn't shake the fear that all of this was too good to be true. Hassan had come back into their lives so suddenly, and while she could see the sincerity in his actions, she couldn't just forget everything. The years of uncertainty, of having to fend for herself and Omar, had left scars that weren't easily healed. "That's wonderful, Omar," she said, her voice warm but careful. "I'm glad you had fun." Hassan stood by the door, watching them, feeling like an outsider in the life he had once shared with Emily. It was a painful realization. No matter how much he wanted to fix things, he knew that he couldn't undo the years of pain and loneliness that had shaped both Emily and Omar. "I'll make dinner tonight," he said, trying to lighten the mood. "I know it's not much, but it's the least I can do." Emily looked up at him, her gaze softening, but there was still a wariness in her eyes. "You don't have to do that," she replied, her voice steady. "We're managing fine on our own." Hassan nodded, understanding that she wasn't ready to let him back in fully. He wasn't sure when or if she ever would be, but he wasn't going to stop trying. For Omar, for the family he had once dreamed of, he would keep fighting. That evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Hassan couldn't help but notice how different it felt. The space between him and Emily wasn't as wide as it had been when they first met again, but it was still there. They spoke casually, but the conversations were guarded. Emily hadn't told him what she had been through all those years, the struggles she had faced alone, and Hassan knew she wasn't ready to share that part of herself just yet. After dinner, as they cleaned up, Omar went to his room to play. The silence in the kitchen was thick, and Hassan found himself at a loss for words. He wanted to say something that would make everything right, but he knew that the weight of his past actions couldn't be fixed with just a few words. Emily finally broke the silence. "Hassan, I need to know. Do you really mean what you say? Do you really want to be a part of our lives again?" Hassan looked up at her, his heart in his throat. "I've never meant anything more in my life," he said, his voice sincere. "I can't change the past, but I can fight for the future. I know it's going to take time, and I'm willing to wait. I'm not going anywhere." Emily studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she nodded. "We'll see," she said softly. "But it's not going to be easy. It's not just about you, Hassan. It's about Omar, too. You have to earn his trust, and you have to show me that you're really here, not just for the moments that are easy, but for the hard ones, too." Hassan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He wasn't just fighting for a second chance with her. He was fighting to be a father to Omar, to prove that he could be the man they needed. The weeks that followed Hassan's return were a whirlwind of emotions, and with each passing day, the delicate balance between the past and present began to shift. Hassan had made great strides in building a relationship with Omar, but the bond with Emily was still fragile, an intricate thread woven through years of pain, resentment, and unspoken words. Every day felt like a step forward, and yet, at the same time, 2 steps backward. Hassan could feel the weight of their history hanging over them, a constant reminder that things could never go back to what they once were. Despite their growing closeness, Emily still hesitated to fully embrace the idea of reconciliation. Her walls were high, built over the years of heartbreak and disappointment. She had learned to survive without Hassan, and now, as he re-entered their lives, she couldn't help but wonder if he was just another mirage, something that appeared to be real, but was destined to vanish once again. Hassan knew he had to earn her trust, but it wasn't easy. Every time he reached out to her, there was a guarded hesitation, a defensiveness that made him feel like a stranger in his own home. Emily was polite, even kind at times, but the warmth that once existed between them felt distant, like a memory fading with time. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Hassan returned home to find Emily sitting alone in the living room. Omar was in his room, playing video games, and the house was quiet, almost too quiet. Emily didn't look up as he entered, and for a moment, Hassan wondered if she even realized he was there. But then, she spoke. "I've been thinking," Emily said, her voice measured, but not cold. She finally looked up at him, her eyes betraying the exhaustion that had been building inside her. "About us. About you being here. I'm not sure what you want from this, Hassan. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive you." Hassan's chest tightened. He had known that this conversation was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. "Emily, I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I can't erase the past, but I'm here now, and I want to be part of your life, part of Omar's life. I just need you to let me prove it." Her gaze softened, but she didn't immediately respond. Instead, she took a deep breath, her eyes searching his face, as if she were looking for something, some sign that this time would be different. The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy. "Why now, Hassan?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why after all this time? Why now that I've learned to live without you? You've built this perfect life for yourself, and I've built one for Omar and me. I can't just throw that away." Hassan closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words sink in. He understood her fear, her hesitations. He couldn't expect her to just pick up where they had left off. He had to face the reality that he wasn't the same man she had once loved, and she wasn't the same woman he had left behind. They had both changed, in ways neither could have predicted, and yet something deep inside him refused to let go. He wasn't going to let their story end in heartbreak. "I don't want to erase what you've built, Emily," Hassan said quietly, "but I want to be a part of it. I want to be here for you, for Omar. I've made mistakes, but I've learned from them. I know I've lost a lot of time, but I'm willing to spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Emily's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she quickly looked away, not wanting to give in to the emotions swirling inside her. She had spent so long protecting herself from the pain that Hassan had caused, and now, with him standing before her, asking for another chance, it felt like the walls she had so carefully built were beginning to crumble. "I don't know if I can believe you, Hassan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can trust you again." The words hit him like a physical blow. Hassan had expected her to be hesitant, but hearing her say that so plainly was a hard pill to swallow. Still, he didn't back down. He couldn't. "I understand," he said, his voice soft but firm. "And I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I will earn it. I promise you that." The silence between them grew heavier, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Emily's mind was racing, her emotions torn between the past and the present. She had always wanted this, a life with Hassan, a family. But now that it was within her grasp, it felt complicated, messy, and uncertain. As Hassan stood there, waiting for her response, his thoughts were with Omar, the boy who had come into his life so unexpectedly, yet so profoundly. Hassan knew that being a father was more than just showing up. It was about consistency, trust, and proving that he could be counted on. But how could he prove himself to Emily when the trust had already been shattered? Before she could say anything more, there was a sound from the hallway. Omar appeared in the doorway, his face bright with excitement. "Mom! Dad! Come see! I made a drawing at school!" Hassan's heart skipped a beat as the boy ran over to him, holding up a piece of paper. It was a simple drawing, a family portrait. The figures were rough, but the message was clear: a father, a mother, and a son. Omar's eyes shone with innocent hope as he looked up at Hassan. "Do you like it?" Omar asked eagerly. Hassan smiled, his throat tight with emotion. He took the drawing in his hands, looking at it for a long moment. It was a symbol of everything he wanted, everything he had lost. He looked up at Emily, who was watching the scene unfold with a mix of pride and sorrow. This was the moment where everything could change. But it all hinged on Emily's decision. "I love it, Omar," Hassan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love it very much." Emily's gaze softened as she watched her son's face light up with happiness. In that moment, she saw the glimmer of hope that Hassan had been trying to offer her. But it wasn't just his words that mattered. It was his actions. It was the small, everyday things that showed he was truly committed. "I think we have a lot to talk about, Hassan," Emily said softly, her voice hesitant but not entirely closed off. "But maybe we can start with this." Hassan nodded, his heart racing with cautious optimism. This was only the beginning. It wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time in years, he felt like he had a chance to make things right. The next few weeks unfolded in a strange rhythm, an uncertain dance between the past, present, and future. Hassan and Emily didn't rush things. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping proclamations of love. Instead, they worked slowly, quietly, trying to rebuild something fragile that had been lost long ago. Every day felt like a tentative step toward healing, but there were moments when the weight of their history felt too heavy to bear. The scars of the past didn't fade easily, and every time Hassan reached out to Emily, he was met with a mixture of hope and fear. Omar, however, was the one constant in all of it. His innocence, his eagerness to be part of a family again, was something neither Hassan nor Emily could ignore. There were still moments when Omar would look at Hassan with skepticism, when he would ask, "Are you going to leave again?" And Hassan would have to reassure him that he wasn't going anywhere. But over time, the boy's guard began to lower. Slowly, he allowed himself to believe in the idea of a father, someone who would show up and stay no matter what. One afternoon, after school, Omar asked if they could go to the park. It was an innocent request, but it felt like a milestone. He had always wanted to spend time with Hassan, but in the pet there had been too much distance, too many walls. But now, they were spending time together, laughing, talking, and doing things that felt normal, like a father and son should. As they played basketball on the court, Hassan couldn't help but watch his son, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and sadness. He knew he could never make up for the years he had missed. He knew that the bond they were building would take time, that there were wounds that would take a lifetime to heal. But in this moment, with the sun setting behind them and Omar's laughter filling the air, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful. "I'm getting better at this," Omar exclaimed as he made a shot from the three-point line. Hassan clapped his hands, impressed. "You sure are," he said with a smile, ruffling his son's hair. "Keep it up, and you might beat me someday." Omar grinned, his face lighting up with the kind of joy that only children seemed capable of. "I can't wait for that day." They continued playing, but as they did, Hassan's mind wandered back to Emily. She was always on his mind in one way or another. Their interactions had become more frequent, more open, but still, there was a distance. Emily wasn't ready to fully embrace what was happening between them. She was cautious, unsure of how to navigate the delicate balance between her old life with Hassan and the new life they were trying to create. That evening, after dinner, Hassan sat across from Emily at the dining table. Omar had gone to bed, his laughter echoing through the house, and the quiet of the evening settled in. Hassan could feel the weight of the moment, the tension between them as they both knew there was something they needed to address. "I've been thinking," Hassan began, his voice low but steady, "about everything. About you, about Omar, about us." Emily met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She wasn't surprised by his words. She had known this conversation was coming. But the question still lingered. Could she trust him again? Could she let him back into her heart after everything? "I've never stopped thinking about you, Emily," Hassan continued, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know I can't erase the past. But I want to be here for you, for Omar. I want to make things right, even if it takes the rest of my life." Emily took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she folded the napkin in front of her. "I don't know, Hassan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to believe you, but I don't know if I can. I've spent so long learning to live without you. I've built a life for myself, and I don't want to lose that." Hassan leaned forward, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I don't want you to lose anything, Emily. I just want the chance to be a part of it, to be a part of Omar's life, of your life. I can't undo what I did, but I can prove that I'm not the same man I was. I can be the man you deserve." The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment Emily didn't respond. She was silent, her eyes searching his face as if trying to gauge the truth behind his words. Hassan could see the conflict in her eyes, the desire for something more, but the fear of being hurt again. Finally, Emily spoke. "I can't promise you anything, Hassan," she said softly, her voice strained. "But I'm willing to try. For Omar, for the family we could be." Hassan's heart raced with a mixture of relief and hope. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a step forward. He wasn't expecting everything to fall into place overnight, but he had to believe that this was the beginning of something real. "I'll take that," Hassan said, a soft smile spreading across his face. "That's all I need. A chance." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't filled with uncertainty or tension. It felt like a quiet understanding, an unspoken agreement between them that they would take things one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, their lives continued to unfold in this fragile new rhythm. Hassan spent more time with Omar, continuing to build their bond, while Emily found herself slowly letting go of the past. She wasn't fully ready to forgive him, but she was learning to trust him again. Slowly, their family began to feel whole again, even if the cracks from the past would never fully disappear. One evening, as they sat together in the living room watching a movie, Hassan looked over at Emily and Omar, and for the first time in years he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that, he realized, was all he needed. As the credits rolled on the screen, Hassan turned to Emily. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude, "for giving me another chance." Emily met his gaze, her eyes softening. "It's not just you, Hassan," she said, her voice gentle. "It's us. We're doing this together." And for the first time in a long time, Hassan felt like he was home. He wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, surrounded by the people he loved, he knew that he had finally found his way back. The room was thick with tension. Hassan stared at the photo, his hands shaking. The image of him with Farah, his past, his regret, stared back at him like a haunting. "I never told you about her," he said, his voice tight with guilt, "because I was ashamed. I thought if I left her behind, I could start fresh, but she was part of my life before you, Emily." Emily's eyes softened, a mixture of hurt and understanding crossing her face. "I get it, Hassan, but why didn't you tell me the truth?" He didn't know how to answer. The past was messy. It was filled with things he wished he could change. "Because I was afraid of losing you," he whispered. Emily didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, digesting everything. Then with a sigh, she stood up. "Then tell me the whole story. Don't keep anything from me again." The cafe was quiet now, the noise of the world outside muted as Hassan spoke, telling Emily everything about his past with Farah, about the promises he had made, the mistakes he had made. As the story poured out, Emily listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, there was a long silence. "You were ashamed," Emily said finally. "But now, you're honest, and that's a start." Hassan nodded, relieved that she hadn't walked away. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I need you to know the truth." Emily met his eyes. "I need time to process this, but I'm glad you told me." "Hey, if you're still with us, I know you're feeling the weight of this story. Hassan's past, his regrets, and the moment he faced Emily with the truth, it's emotional, isn't it? I want to know what you think. What do you think about his decision to finally open up? Was Emily right to give him a chance? And what do you think is going to happen next in their journey? Drop a comment below and let's hear your thoughts. Whether it's a tear or a hope for redemption, your voice matters here. Your opinion will shape the way we move forward with this intense and dramatic story. So don't be shy, share your feelings, your predictions, or your favorite moments so far. Let's talk about this roller coaster of emotions together.